Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. We begin tonight with money and, of course, the politics that usually attends money in government and politics. Nathan Vandiver joins us from KUAR, Public Radio in Central Arkansas. Price Dooley from the Political Science faculty at UCA. Michael Hiblin, Nathan's boss, and the news director at KUAR. Guys, thanks to everybody for coming in. Michael, we got the numbers. The Department of Finance and Administration, as always, the first of the month releases the revenue collection numbers, tax collection numbers for April, and it was undoubtedly a very good month, even a superior month.
Yeah, major.
But there were some caveats as usual with it.
Yeah, a very major surge for the state. 642 million brought in, believed to be the largest amount ever collected in a single month. The collections were about $100 million above last year, $99 million above forecast. The department said part of this had to do with filers shifting their income to last year to avoid paying higher taxes for this year. But that's certainly good news. We've heard a lot from the Department of Finance and Administration this week saying that they're expecting the state will end the fiscal year with nearly $14 million surplus. They revised the forecast for the fiscal year that ends at the end of June, moving it upward by about $38 million. So looking good there. They said this factors in about $10 million in tax cuts that were approved during the session, and we're still expecting about a $4.9 billion forecast for the coming fiscal year.
The demand side, though, as measured by sales tax collections, still is not as robust as anyone would like.
Yeah. That's still a factor. We're seeing more of what's happening here playing into the taxes, and this is traditionally a big time of year as people pay their taxes, but sales tax collections still relatively flat.
And you look at those prices because that's a good indicator of the overall economy, how consumer confidence.
Definitely, I think sales taxes are down with roughly about 5% percentage points of as far as the time frame we're looking at. But you have to look at the broader economy though too. You look the unemployment numbers came in nationally today, and they were at 7.5%, which marks a 0.1 percentage point decrease, which is good. You look at the home construction in terms of people going out and buying homes, that was up 7%. Those March numbers were. You look at even more broadly here for the state of Arkansas, you got a legislative session that seemed to go ahead and indicate some economic stimulus as relates to passing the private Medicaid option, and then of course the steel mill project was going to be funded. So all in all, a pretty good time frame as far as the economy is concerned as relates to Arkansas.
Michael, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't have anything.
Well, and it continues to be, undoubtedly there's a recovery underway, but as measured by consumer demand and housing sales, housing prices, it's an uneven, it's an almost cruel recovery because it's leaving some folks behind.
Indeed, the recovery is still mostly going to higher income people in Arkansas. You're still seeing lower income people not doing as well, and the recovery not hitting them as much.
Bottom line on the April number, and the DFA the day before also issued its outlook, its forecast for this and the next fiscal year, 14, measuring in the tax cuts, and bottom line, without any bad bumps in the road, even with the tax cuts, A, B, and C ought to be the budget as approved ought to be completely funded.
Should be, and perhaps even end up with a surplus.
Well, some surplus and a rainy day fund, I think in 14 of $20 million. Against a $5 billion budget, that's not a lot of money, but we'll take it. Nathan?
Yeah, but the main things are the full budget. All categories of the full budget will be funded with these projections. DFNA, at the direction of the governor, is regularly conservative in their projections, and they didn't see the economy as looking that good in November when they originally made these, and now things are getting a little bit better, so they are refining that. But yeah, the surpluses, fully funded budget, and it is looking better for these tax cuts that passed out of this past legislative session, or this recent legislative session, and could possibly lead to a few more if legislators stick with that with that line of governing in the future. But it is definitely looking a little bit better for the economy of the state. But if it continues, it means we might see a few more tax cuts.
Well, let's follow that line for just a moment. We've got a fiscal session coming up next year. This one ran 100 days, folks. The next one probably won't go that long, but at any rate, we do have a scheduled fiscal session next February. So, politically, ideologically, fiscally, any way you want to look at it, are we prepared to look at more tax cut legislation?
Well,
any appetite for that?
Well, I think there is appetite for it, but I think the first hurdle is that the fiscal session is intended to look at the budget and look at reapprove appropriations, and you have to have a 75% majority, I believe, to look at tax cuts, which are not appropriation bills. And so you'd have to get that 75% majority again, which we saw, recently in the same legislature with with Medicaid expansion and with Big River Steel appropriations. And so it might be tough to get all the votes needed in a fiscal session to look at tax cuts. But if you could, I think the support would be there for it. I think that it is just increased. It is kind of a safety net for legislators to look at more tax cuts, but it will be hard to get that 75% majority to take a look at them. But definitely in the next general session, it looks like it'll probably happen. An
even numbered year next year. We've got primaries right after the session, Price.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a political will to do that, particularly if the state is running a surplus. So in the fiscal session, right before primaries, to go ahead and go back to your constituents and say, see, we've brought you back a little more money in your pocket. That's going to go ahead and help, I think, Republican legislators try and hold on, because they have a bit of a problem right now. Obamacare, which they campaigned against so much in 2012, they sort of voted for a part of it in 2014. And so they're going to have to go ahead and bring something back to their constituents to go and say, in 13. So they're going to have to go ahead and bring something back to their constituents. So, and that's going to be, I think, some more tax cuts.
And you always have lawmakers who, this steady chorus of, when you have a surplus, we need to give this back to the people. And already there have been calls for that. A lot of Republicans wanted to do that during this session. They got some tax cuts through. There were a lot of people who would have liked to have seen more and are probably going to want more next year.
The estimates vary, but up to 140, 145 million in the session just ended. Well, anyway, on to raw, pure politics. We've got primaries coming up. Mr. Beebe is in his final 2 years. Excuse me. Primaries in two parties. You watched a couple of the candidates last night, Michael, Thursday night.
Yeah, we had Curtis Coleman. The two announced candidates seeking the Republican nomination, Asa Hutchinson, the former congressman, and Little Rock businessman Curtis Coleman, both spoke to the Delta caucus last night. They pretty much hit on some of the same tones, but one key difference that they did bring up was the Big River Steel project, over in Osceola, which the legislature approved $125 million in state incentives to bring to the state. Curtis Coleman said he's a little uncomfortable with big super projects like this, said he would have liked to have seen perhaps $1 million going to 125 different small entrepreneurial startups. But Asa Hutchinson said he supported Big River Steel, thinks it's good, was an opportunity that the state shouldn't pass up, and said we had due diligence in how this was approved, the fact that it was brought before lawmakers and carefully analyzed. But Coleman felt this is somewhat of a risk with one company getting this kind of money. What if this company fails? Whereas his argument was let a lot of other smaller companies get a bite at this money. So it's just really the opening here on the Republican battle. We'll have the two Democrats who have announced for governor speaking today. We're recording this mid-morning, Friday morning. In a couple of hours, we're expecting Bill Halter, the former lieutenant governor, as well as Mike Ross, former 4th District congressman, to speak. They've already been exchanging some barbs, and we'll see if they actually go at each other. These aren't formal debates. They're speaking individually, but still, it's a chance for them to actually kind of go after one another in each other's faces.
A spicy exchange. I mean, well, not really an exchange, but
It raises an overarching question for both primaries. Does ideology trump financial backing? Because Curtis Coleman, ideologically speaking, right in the primary, he's going to be more in line with right-wing conservatives, whereas Hutchinson is more of a mainline, mainstream Republican. On the other end, you've got Halter, who's fairly liberal for Arkansas, versus Ross. I'm sorry, Ross, who's more of a conservative mainline Democrat for Arkansas. So that's an interesting question. Does money trump ideology?
and there's a geopolitical factor in there too. You know, the territorial prerogatives of the Hutchinsons over the years really been Northwest Arkansas. But before and back to the GOP for a second, we still don't know about Mr. Carter, Speaker Carter. What's he going to do?
The talk continues to steadily ramp up about him running for governor, but my guess is as good as yours. I imagine he's still trying to make a decision, but it's who knows at this point. But I think he wants
we
to.
do know that he's making phone calls. I mean, that's hardly a stunning revelation, but he's certainly making phone calls according to innumerable.
And it's something he's given a good hard look at, and like he said at the end of the legislative session, he wanted to go home and give it some time and really think about it. But he's one of those politicians from the state legislature that definitely had those ambitions for higher office, and really has cross-party appeal. Working with Democrats, getting the speakership, and also working with Democrats for the private option and Big River Steel programs. But he would likely have widespread popularity. I guess the one of the critiques is that he possibly might not have as much popularity as he thinks outside of people who followed the legislature day in and day out. But I guess that's what he's trying to figure out right now.
Well, yeah, kind of a beltway figure, as it were. We're getting ready, Price, I think, to see some real, maybe not a knife fight within the Republican Party, but there have already been some skirmishes internally.
Well, definitely in terms of the future of the Republican Party. I mean, again, there's a difference between sort of being in opposition for so long, for over 100 years, and now actually being, dominating the legislature and dominating state politics.
Well, I mean, Mr. Carter's election as Speaker was pretty divisive.
It caused a lot of consternation among some circles in the Republican Party. In fact, when it came down to the Medicaid expansion, some voted against it just out of spite that Carter was Speaker, and he was actually was favoring it.
And as you were saying earlier, the geopolitical divide within the Republican Party, it was evident with Big River Steel in the legislative session as it is now, and they were just making comments, yesterday still about it, and with Medicaid expansion. You have with Republicans in eastern Arkansas and in the Delta, they're a region of the state that's long been based on agriculture. Those jobs are more involved with the government, and so they're much more likely going to be more used to dealing with the government day in and day out. But in Northwest Arkansas, more private business is kind of driving it. And I don't know if it's necessarily business versus farming, or if it's just the completely changing demographic of the state and increased population going up to Northwest Arkansas. But there is that divide, and that is it'll really be interesting to see how that divide plays out for these candidates in the gubernatorial election.
Well, you get over there into row crop country, business and ag are pretty much intertwined.
Yeah. But Speaker Carter, I think the fact that he wasn't too extreme to the right, that he did work with a lot of Democrats, that could give some comfort to a lot of people who otherwise might not support a Republican for governor. But we'll see. Still a lot of time. Still others considering getting into the race as well.
Well, the gentleman who I think it's fair to say at this point is presumed to be the Republican nominee in the United States Senate race, with Mr. Pryor seeking a third term now and next November. Continues making waves, continues making headlines.
Yeah. Tom Cotton, he also spoke last night at the Delta Grassroots Caucus, and really just has a lot of excitement. As he was introduced, they brought up that they can't recall someone who, as a freshman in Congress, getting the kind of attention he is. He still is on the national TV programs, Sunday morning programs, Meet the Press. He's really wowing a lot of people, and so a lot of people very excited about him. He spoke generally about the need for further deregulation, suggested to this group, talking about ways to improve the Delta, the poverty down there, that deregulation would do a lot to help farmers, and hit on a lot of the same familiar tones we're hearing from. But the Republicans really excited to see him. There's such a buzz about him that really does seem to make it seem very possible that he could indeed be the candidate. But he's only been in office for really a few months, but already so much excitement about him.
He speaks his mind, Price.
Oh, he's that star power.
He flames.
Oh, definitely. He's hard right, and he embraces that, and that's what really fires up the party, the Republican Party in Arkansas. He has that star quality. He's raised $500,000 in his first quarter numbers. So that's pretty good for a safe House district. And so those numbers are speaking well in terms of his possibly running against Senator Pryor in the in next year's election. Although Senator Pryor is an incumbent with an old name in Arkansas and a lot of money to back that.
Both parties want that seat desperately.
Yeah, and Pryor are now getting heat. We discussed last week there are groups, liberal groups, that are targeting Pryor, starting radio ads. Really upset with them for not backing the expanding background checks. He said in an interview with me a few days ago that part of it was he didn't support that bill. He believed a separate measure being pushed by Senator Charles Grassley would have been better. But he's taking a lot of heat from that. We're going to be hearing radio ads, also direct mail flyers going out. There's already talk of perhaps him getting a challenge for the Democratic nomination, a stark contrast from last time he was running for office.
Nathan, he's catching it left and right.
He is, and there's even more talk of attacks on him on guns, even from the right. Even though he voted against the background checks, which were such a tight dividing line between Democrats and Republicans, it's going to be a big race, and he's going to have a really tough fight. But like Price was saying, it's a political family, and he's got the name recognition, and he's been around. The big question, like we're talking about, is who is going to be the Republican challenger. We were talking about Cotton. One other thing I was going to mention, he has kind of ramped up the talk on foreign policy, something not directly, probably not on the mind of a lot of Arkansans, and we were talking about money coming into his campaign. That's going to help fund him from more national funding sources, and so he's going to be very he's definitely going to be a possible front runner, but still who knows what he's going to do. And then also that would open up his congressional race in the 4th district. But yeah, Pryor's a big name. Pryor's he's been working in Washington. He's been a politician for a while. He knows what he's doing, and it's going to be a big fight no matter who's running.
Another in a long series of distinguished bipartisan program at the Clinton School of Public Service. Thursday, who comes in but the former
Pryor can't catch a break.
The former Speaker of the House of Representatives, now the Minority Leader, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi, and you can imagine Mr. Pryor thinking, is there no other time when you could have brought Ms. Pelosi in?
I did ask Nikolai DePippa, the director of public programs for the Clinton School. I asked him, why now, and he said that they put the request in 2 years ago.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, it just happens.
Yeah, she just happened to be able to come now. But yeah, that's the Republican Party. Nancy Pelosi did elicit a news release from the Republican Party tying Mike Ross's votes for her, or just reminding the Arkansas public that Mike Ross had voted for her for Speaker of the House 4 times as congressman, and that's she's definitely a polarizing figure, and much like President Obama himself here in Arkansas, and any sort of key figures of the Democratic Party like that are going to not be something that Senator Pryor's going to have to kind of distance himself from.
Yeah, well, and the GOP would be happy to see him try to distance himself, or be engaged in distancing himself for the next 16 months.
Oh, definitely.
18.
I think Nancy Pelosi is probably the only Democrat that polls lower than the president in the state.
But at the same time, a fairly dispassionate observer observed to me yesterday of the scene. Take Mr. Cotton. Is he too hot? Does he come off as too strong? And the word he did not use, but which I interpret him to mean, does he come off sometimes as too extreme? Where's the center? And do you want to be in the center this year?
I think that'll come back to, he's like we were saying, he's talking about foreign policy, and is he going to start talking more about specific Arkansas issues and what he's bringing back to the state, other than just pushing the conservative plan or agenda abroad from the U.S. Why maybe we'll see him talking more about the state specifically.
Yeah, it's national security issues that he's really spoken out on. Clay.
I think I think what's going to be an indicator of 2014, though, and we've got to keep in mind, the economy has been in the doldrums for a long time, right? So we're finally coming out of that. So if the economy is looking pretty good in 2014, Arkansans are being a little bit more optimistic. I'm curious in terms of how an anti-whatever campaign is going to actually work out. So I think that if the economy works out pretty well, if PPACA or the ACA or Obamacare is implemented fairly okay, then you might see some Democrats do pretty well in 2014. So we don't know. It's a little far out yet to go ahead and make a determination.
Yeah, Mike.
It is indeed, and yes, when conditions are good like this. But there is some talk that the health care, that there's still a good percentage of people in the country that don't know that the president's health care plan is now law of the land. There's still just among the overall population, and there's the suggestion that once things really begin being implemented next year, that you could have a bit of a backlash. But yes, when things are good at this point, do you want to rock the boat with someone speaking so much in an anti-tone?
Price? Do you?
Well,
Best defense is a good offense, or
when times
you
are
measure that against the times?
Exactly. Exactly. You measure it against the time. So it really is going to depend. If the economy's not doing so well, then the president, the party in power gets the blame. So that'll have ramifications nationally, and it could help Cotton ride into power, in the Senate. It could also help the Republican legislature kind of flip, at least in the House, if the economy's not doing so well. Because once you bought it, right, you own it.
You own it?
Yeah.
All right. With that, we are out of time. Guys, thanks to everybody for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.